Feminism is the single most harmful force against women in our recorded history. However, you would not know this from speaking to the women themselves, as the short-term benefits of feminism have become sedating. The masses of women, the long-term effects will render them completely useless, damaged, and unstable. As a demographic, women may exert their influence in democratic countries to mitigate some of the damage. The long-term effects will render the masses of women completely useless, damaged, and unstable. As a demographic, the damage, however, is irreversible. As a consequence, a portion of men have been liberated from their traditional gender roles and are unable to be governed by any female government or institution. This group of men cannot be controlled by any woman. Women entering the workforce was the best thing that could have happened to the individual, free-thinking man, and the worst thing that could have happened to any society that permitted it to happen. As an individual man, he was liberated from the obligation of working to provide for an entire family. Now the woman could contribute as well, and should she desire to stay at home, the flooding of wage slaves would make it nearly impossible for women in the middle class and lower class to stay at home. This dependency on her spouse for income, despite having her own income, would often leave her confused because of the conflicting propaganda. She would learn about freedom and choice from her television, but in reality, she was easing the burden on the man, who might still be working long hours. In other words, she was enabling him to be more free. The bachelors are the men who benefit the most from this economic liberation. An enlightened man can have the women of today entertain him and pay for themselves. However, it was not as bad as it was in other economically trying times in history when the man was the only breadwinner. Something that would have been unheard of in earlier times. A person who is familiar with the system is able to take advantage of it, and these men flourish in their own ways, even though a bachelor should avoid the distractions that women present. In older societies, a man would have to be married and a family man to advance in certain careers and corporations. Bachelors were often treated with suspicion and caution with the sexual liberation, so it is still fortunate for him to be a part of this economic liberation. The process of removing social stigmas and shame tactics for women's sexual behavior enabled crafty men to take advantage of the newly liberated women. Today, a man can provide exactly as much for himself as he desires without having to make any commitments that he does not want to make. You can do things to the women around you that men used to go to war for the opportunity to do. The men who have been gained out of the sexual revolution would not have been able to thrive in any system. You can do things to the women around you that men used to go to war for the opportunity to do. These are the men who would have benefited from the time when all you needed was a steady job to obtain a wife and start a family under this system. Even though this did not explicitly stack the deck in their favor, they would have been able to take advantage of the situation. The sexual revolution is returned to its original form for the species, which is one of primal lust and animalistic urges, as a result of the removal of restraints placed on women. These men would have no reason to better themselves or challenge themselves other than the requirement to work for another man and bring a wage home for their wives. Both types of men are freed from the mundane routine of nuclear families and white picket fences as a result of the men who challenge themselves to achieve new heights and the men who recognize its futility and choose to walk their own path. Women are attracted to men who push themselves to new heights. Once he has learned the rules that are obstructed by his society, a man is able to turn any situation into his favor and always has the ability to adapt to his surroundings. Many men have the desire to have the mundane routine of nuclear families and to keep their white picket fences maintained on the weekends. However, given that these men no longer have the option of following a conventionally prescribed way of life, they are compelled to forge their own individual paths. These men are incapable of following orders from anyone because they are biologically programmed to provide protection and safety for others. As a result, they cannot be controlled by anyone. These men typically fall into one of three categories: either they are adapting and improving their bodies, pursuing careers in charisma, or they are enjoying their hedonistic lifestyles. The third category is the one in which they are either wallowing in their own self-pity. And by admitting that they are not suited for this primitive way of life, men are able to feel empowered by the degeneration that women have unleashed upon society regardless of which category they fall into. When men become aware of the world around them, they are unable to go back to living in the fantasy that previously governed their lives. They feel as though a burden has been removed from their shoulders, and they are now free to choose their own destiny. It is unfortunate that these men must suffer because pain is the most efficient teacher, and should they survive their torment, they will have learned the most from their ordeal. The men who suffer because of this way of life are the ones who play by the old rules. They should be able to draw conclusions from their experiences and move closer to awakening from their manufactured slumber. The men who bemoan the state of society and its irresponsible women have not found a cause that supersedes. They should be able to take lessons from their experiences and move closer to awakening from their artificial slumber. The women they yearn for are evidence that these men do not want to change themselves because they will be the first to engage in the traditional practices of courtship and marriage should society return to respecting reason and responsibility tomorrow. An empowered man who is dependent only on himself is the most powerful force on this planet, stronger than any force of nature. However, they would rather everyone around them change in order to conform to their expectations. When his shackles are shattered and his hands are free to craft his own destiny, he will be able to choose exactly what kind of future he wants to shape. Feminism has shed light on the true nature of women, which has been lost from ancient wisdom and has become degenerate. Because it is so pervasive and cannot be contained, the downfall of women will never be forgotten, and no amount of censorship will make it so that men's hearts are no longer filled with pain or that women who sold their souls for pleasure and prosperity are no longer alone in the world. This way of life can be seen as unsustainable by any sane and rational man. However, that same man must also come to terms with the gravity of the problem and acknowledge that there are solutions available. However, those solutions are not workable and cannot be implemented. No woman would vote against her own best interests and support the concept of limiting women's rights if she had a say in the matter. When this topic is brought up in polite company, a rational man should be aware that the end of his society is drawing near. When people who take more than they contribute are given the right to vote, this is what happens. Many great men throughout history have warned against this, but ancient wisdom is rarely applied. When the system collapses and society is in ruins, it will be the men who rebuild it who will be the deciding factor of the sustainability of that new society built upon. This is due to the fact that each generation believes that it is more enlightened than the one that came before it. The ruins of the old as if the enlightened men choose to contribute or not. An enlightened man is aware that even if he exerted his mastery over his domain, it would eventually succumb to weakness and decadence even if he did everything in his power to prevent it. Once he had passed away, and this feeling of futility is a crippling adversary to productivity in this age of information, and with the understanding that comes with it comes pain. Those who help destroy society and liberate it will face their greatest challenge in convincing men, who are in more spiritual, emotional, and mental pain than at any other time in history, to participate in the rebuilding process.